Ever wanted to start a podcast but never found the time or found that SoundCloud makes you pay for more upload time? Then Anchor is the right place for you. It is a Spotify company that allows for unlimited uploading time for free and distributes your content to people via Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, etc. It will also allow for sponsors and will sponsor you themselves. Your viewers can also create a donation plan through the same company to support your content. Sign up for Anchor today and get your podcast going. Because Anchor is great. Well, here we are. Hello, welcome to the Mongols Podcast. I'm your host, Samwise J. Morgenstern, a.k.a. Janos Jalic. And, well, finally, after lots of communication, I have finally brought on the man, the myth, the legend, History with Hilbert.
Oh, that's much too kind of an introduction for me, but thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. And sorry it took so long. It has been a long time of communication, but I feel like we ramped up the tension and now we're ready to talk about Mongols. So I'm excited. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, and in this episode, I'm going to call this little thing, in case your crusade fails, break glass for the Mongols.
Is there a reason why this title?
Well, yeah, because we're actually talking about a certain little-known figure by the name of Friar William of Rubruck.
Okay, so who is this figure? Because I must say that I haven't actually heard of his name before, but he's an interesting character, I gather.
Oh, he absolutely is. He actually was a Franciscan monk, actually from Flanders, which is exactly why I called you in. Because,
No, that's interesting.
Because, well... Yes, the Wilhelmus jokes, right there. That's exactly why I called you in. I was looking for an excuse, then I found a little short version of his, book, and I was like, okay, I have an excuse now. So...
That's like the perfect excuse to add that in. Any excuse to put a Wilhelmus in a video, I'll take it, you know?
Yep, and he actually was on crusade. Although he wasn't actively, fighting on the crusade, as far as I know, he was mostly just, traveling, preaching, and healing as a Franciscan monk, which is what you're supposed to do, obviously.
There were a lot of monks and other people that went along on crusade, right? We tend to think of the crusaders just being the knights, the kind of Templar figures that go, but in reality, there were lots of people that went along, lots of friars, lots of priests, people like this as well. So it's interesting we have that surviving to us, the source about this Flemish monk going along.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the People's Crusade was a whole bunch of untrained professionals, so that's actually just that's just part of the norm anyway.
Exactly. There's a great Dutch book about it that I read once, and there's another one about this. Is a little tangent here. Apologies, Janos, I'm already going off on piece here. But there's another Dutch book which is called Kruistocht in Spijkerbroek, which means crusade in jeans, and it's about a time traveler who accidentally goes back in time and ends up on a crusade. It's quite a good read if there's any Dutch listeners, but yeah, an interesting one.
Well, that'll certainly be something for everybody to look after. But anyway, so unfortunately, this crusade that William of Rubruck went on was with the somewhat unlucky Saint Louis IX of France in around 1250, and their plan was, we're going to invade Egypt and not attack Jerusalem, because Egypt is kind of the problem that we had to take care of before we get to Jerusalem. And he was fighting at Al-Mansura. His brother was in charge of part of the forces. Got a little overeager on the attack, and when I mean by a little overeager, he overextended, got himself killed, and the rest of the army captured.
So that's not a great start for a Flemish monk then, in 1250, going along with the French. I mean, that's what you get when you put the French in charge, right? But anyway, be quiet while you carry on.
Yeah, anyway, so yeah. And so, but eventually, Louis actually does manage to get out. He, pays the ransom or whatever. And, well, apparently, because he's A, religious, B, didn't learn the lesson from last time, he wants to try again. And William actually, while he was traveling in the Middle East with the Seventh Crusade, actually had heard about the Mongols from various people that he was reading while he was there, the locals he encountered sometimes. But most notably, he heard about it from this other guy, Andrew of Longjumeau, who had actually visited the empire just a little bit before then, before the two actually met, or whatever. And he decided to just actually go out and take a visit, see what would happen, and this was actually a mission sanctioned by the French king. So naturally, it looked like very much Louis was on the lookout for some allies. And there is certainly some justification onto this if we're looking just at the Mongols' ability to hit Islamic powers where they were at. Because the Mongols up until like around the late 1250s were actually basically considered invincible against Islamic powers.
And when we're talking about the period of about 1250, just for those, including myself, who aren't that aware of the exact phases of Mongol expansion, where is the Mongol Empire in 1250? Obviously, this is after the death of Genghis Khan.
Oh, we are long past the death of Genghis. We are about a good 23 years, actually, and things have very much actually changed for the Mongol Empire by this point. As many know, Genghis made the sad and tragic mistake of leaving the empire to his kids. So he...
That's a good idea. It's like having an open house and then, one house party later, maybe a few more house parties in Genghis's case, but sure, that's what's happening in the Mongol Empire right now, that the kids have taken over and it's not looking good.
Oh, it is not. So, originally the heir that he set up to take over was his third child, Ogedei Han. But Ogedei Han was both a jerk and quite a bit of a drunkard, so naturally his self-destructive behavior was going to catch up to him eventually. So, around 1240, just as the Mongols are expanding into Europe, actually hitting up my grandparents' neck of the woods in Hungary, Ogedei kind of died, probably of alcoholism. And so naturally, the Mongols started fading away. Although, as far as I know, this wasn't necessarily due to Ogedei's death itself, but you do eventually have to go back into like the new Han sometime.
Because am I right in thinking that the Mongol tradition is that when the Khan dies, all the other sons have to come back? Is it called the Kurultai?
Yep, that's exactly the point.
Then choose the new Khan. Okay.
Yeah, because...
How little I know here by carefully selecting what I do for Mongol history, but you'll be able to tell us more about that.
Yeah, so, anyways, after Ogedei kicks the bucket, his wife actually takes over as regent for their son, Guyu Khan. And unfortunately, Guyu Khan has all the same problems as his dad, but worse.
Oh dear.
So yeah, so when he finally actually gets in charge and his mom stops being the regent, he immediately turns on her and her her servant Fatima, and eventually Fatima is actually executed on trumped up charges of treason. And by that point, his mom's already dead, and he continues to kind of be a jerk and drink himself out, and then he dies.
Seems to be a recurring theme here for drunk idiots in the Mongol Empire. But to get someone slightly better, I feel that we've kind of crossed the ridge of two drunk Khans and we're about to get a good Khan. Am I right in thinking that?
Oh, a halfway decent Khan that isn't going to completely drink himself to death. And that is specifically the oldest member of the Tollywood line, a guy by the name of Monke Han, who actually starts up officially as Han in 1250 after about 4 years of basically a lot of conflict within the Mongol Empire of who's going to be in charge. And this is actually known in Mongol history as the Tollywood Revolution. Basically, the youngest son of Genghis Khan was died of alcoholism very early on to Ogedei's reign, and was basically had his realm kept safe and relatively secure by his very super strong wife, Sorkoktani, who managed to raise all 4 boys to manhood and get them to actually basically take over the running of the Mongol Empire against all odds.
And at this point, when we get to this level, when the younger son of Genghis is dead and Ogedei is dead, and then his son comes along and he dies. What's the territorial expanse of the Mongol Empire looking like? Were they already pressing against the Islamic powers at this time in the Middle East?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Genghis Khan's own first brushes with the Islamic Empire, specifically the Khwarizmids. Originally, he actually sent a trading mission or two to them, but unfortunately, they got massacred by the governor of Otrar over in the eastern portions of the Khwarizmid Empire in modern-day Iran. So naturally, Genghis was like, nobody kills my diplomats. And that means...
That's a recurring theme with the Mongols, right, is that when you kill their emissaries or their diplomats, that's a line that's being crossed, and no one really gets away with that.
Oh no, nobody does. And actually, Genghis Khan decides, I'm going to hit those guys with everything I have. And basically, he starts off looking a little light, and then he suddenly blitzkriegs right through them, and they completely don't expect it. Basically, almost the entire empire falls out overnight. Although the last surviving one of the last surviving sons of the Khwarizm Shah, Jalaluddin, actually manages to hold on for a good couple years after that. Basically, the Khwarizmid Empire is not looking good at all.
So, Khorasan today, the old province, are we talking?
Yep, we are talking about that.
Around that kind of region, right?
Yep.
Okay. So that's kind of, is that the furthest that the Mongols have pushed into the Middle East at this point in 1250, or have they managed to have brushes against the other powers there as well?
They are certainly having their own fun times with the Seljuks, mostly the Seljuks losing to them. But at this point in time, mostly the Abbasids and the Assassins and various other Islamic powers in the area are like, we've definitely experienced them. We certainly had our own problems, but nothing's too serious yet. But then when Mongke Khan officially comes to power, he starts delegating like troops to go on campaign X or go on this campaign or that campaign. He's like, so Kublai, you and I are going to like mess up Sung China for fun for the next couple of years. And Hulagu, the Abbasid Caliph never said yes to the Han and paid tribute, right? Yeah, he kind of didn't. That's not great, right? Yeah, you're gonna be messing him up. And also, the assassins are a problem, so please take care of the assassins if you don't mind.
So this is kind of what's kicking off in the Mongol Empire around 1250. They're the big boys in the house, and if people aren't paying tribute or I think hadn't been conquered yet, then those were the guys they were messing up. But it's this world that our Flemish priest walks into, let's say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he actually decides to go to the closest part of the Mongol Empire to his homeland, specifically the Ulus Jochi, otherwise known as the Golden Horde, in basically every record that is not from the 14th and 15th centuries.
It's interesting how the name then changes, because we were saying before we recorded that I've been listening to some of the podcasts before where you explained that the Golden Horde isn't actually a term that was used by the Mongols or even during the time the Golden Horde existed, but it's come up later. And so it's interesting that we think the Golden Horde is such a Mongolian name, it's such a classic for the period. Actually, it's from a lot later on. It wasn't used at the time.
And the original name was even more Mongolian.
What was the original name?
Well, it was actually known as the Ulus Jochi, which basically means this is the land that Jochi is supposed to inherit. Of course, Jochi didn't actually get to inherit it at the time because he had some very mysterious circumstances about his death shortly before Genghis Khan died. So naturally, he didn't get his inheritance, but his kids did get his inheritance. And actually, his sons Batu and Berke are going to be very early frequent guests in the book written by William of Rubruck about his travels.
Interesting.
So yeah, William of Rubruck, he decides to go on his vacation/diplomatic mission to the Mongols, and he first stops at modern day Sevastopol, and then he proceeds to travel throughout the Ulus Jochi, he's actually going to end up going to Mongkut's court over in Karakoram, over in modern-day Mongolia.
So that's interesting, because he's obviously on crusade, he's in Egypt, and he hears about the Mongols in Egypt, but he decides when going to visit them not to sort of cross the Muslim lands and then go to Khorasan and into the Mongol Empire that way, but then to go back up to Europe, because obviously Sevastopol, it's now kind of Russia, but it used to be Ukraine in any case, I think. So he goes obviously into Eastern Europe to go and visit them rather than the other way.
Well, I think it's probably a pretty smart choice considering what the Mongols are doing to the Middle East. Because when Hulagu actually got into much of the Middle East in the 1250s, he was naturally causing a lot of problems because he had a big army and with excellent siege tactics, and basically a lot of the Islamic powers were disorganized and not really ready to meet him in battle. The Abbasids were absolutely slaughtered right at their own capital in Baghdad. And in fact, after a 2-week siege, the caliph himself was supposedly rolled up in a carpet and trampled by horses.
That doesn't appear to be too good for one's health.
Well, either that or the other version of the story is that he was locked in a room with his treasury made of all gold and just told to stay there.
Yeah, I imagine the taste of gold isn't too nice when you're used to the fine foods of a Baghdadi Khalid, but it has quite strong Game of Thrones vibes, that one, doesn't it? I think they took a leaf out of the Mongols book, or several leaves, actually thinking back to the gold that's put over the head of, I'm not sure if you watch Game of Thrones.
I don't actually currently at the moment.
Put over the head of one of the characters, and that sounds very much like, was it the Shah of Khorasan that was done to
No, actually that was done to his governor. Because the governor...
Okay.
Because the governor was the guy who did the famous Ochar massacre where he killed all the diplomats, and naturally Genghis was looking for some major payback. So when Genghis finally took Ochar, he actually had the governor brought before him, and he was like, "So you're the little guy who decided to mess with my diplomats. Yeah, I kind of did want some gold. Can I have some gold? I did want some precious metal. Can I have some precious metals? Yeah, sure you can. What do you mean by sure I can? Servant, bring the molten silver. Shove it down his throat."
Oh, it's not a good way to go, but it just goes to show how much this has lasted in popular memory, because in Game of Thrones, and I'll keep it brief because you don't watch it or haven't read it, but it's this very annoying little character. He's working with these kind of nomadic group called the Dothraki, who are very much based on, clearly have influence from the Mongols as well. And they're meant to be providing him with a crown, but he betrays them, or I can't remember exactly how it goes. And so the leader says, "A crown for a king," and then tips over the molten gold onto his head. So it's very much from the Mongols' playbook, I feel. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And he's traveling throughout the Ulus Jochi, but one of the things that kind of made me think a little bit is, like, actually when he's writing this old book, he's actually still calling the region that he's walking through, which is basically modern day Ukraine and much of Western Russia, he still calls it Scythia, after of course the famous Scythians.
Interesting.
Yeah, because like
from the Latin name as well, right? At the time, I'm not sure which language he was writing in, but maybe he read about it in Latin texts that referred to it as Scythia still.
That is, as far as I know, the case. Although I think that by that point there was also a little bit of popularity for also calling the region Sarmatia after the Sarmatians.
Right.
I imagine the Poles would have been stoked to have called it Sarmatia.
Probably, but I think the Poles had a bit of a worse time of it beforehand, so maybe that was, what they were being called might not be the first thing on their agenda, right?
Yeah. Yep. I can definitely agree with that. And he also noticed as he was going through the region. Wait, Women aren't being confined to the house and being forced to give birth to children. They will often actually help lead the caravans, and obviously there's actually some description throughout a good chunk of the book of like the copious drinking habits of the people of the region. Obviously, a lot of that was just simply the Mongols being the Mongols. You can ask literally any heir to the...
Right?
Oh yeah, you can ask basically any heir to the Chinggisid Empire. The lone exception I've actually found, strangely enough, is Chagatai, the second son of Genghis. Like, I've tried to look for his records of him dying of alcoholism, but no, he goes from old age, actually, strangely enough.
Wow, okay, so it's a rare thing to not be an alcoholic if you're a Mongolian fan.
Oh, it is very rare, actually. And that's mostly because actually the Mongols Mongol Hans actually spend a lot of their later history, especially post Genghis, actually slowly becoming figureheads. And that's not just from their moms being their overbearing moms being the regent. That actually comes from a very powerful position, especially in the Yuan dynasty, known as the Taishu, who basically functions as the prime minister. And over time, as the Mongol Hans keep on declining in health and capabilities, the Taishu keeps on taking a bit more of the workload, to the point where he's basically appointing and executing puppets all on his own. And obviously, that's not good news for the Chinggisids.
I suppose not, but I guess for them it's, if you're a ruler and you have all the wealth, the kind of business of running such a huge empire might not be the most interesting thing. So often in other monarchies and empires, it was the ministers who really held the power, the trusted prime ministers that were in charge in a way. And
also being the Taishu is also beneficial if you're one really ambitious guy who's trying to break out of not being a Chinggisid. Because the thing about being a Chinggisid is that, yes, even though you are not a Chinggisid, you are equal to everybody else in the society of the Mongol Empire to a certain point. You will never be able to qualify for being truly part of the ruling class. You will never be able to really, truly rule your own part unless you are a Chinggisid heir or married into the Chinggisid family. But mostly, being a Chinggisid heir is going to help a lot more.
So it was a way for more, I'm hesitant to say common people, but non-Mongolian, not from that part of the family, to actually gain power and influence within the empire.
Oh yeah, Timur Lang basically controlled both the Chagatai and the Ilkhanates throughout his reign during the late 14th century, and he was actually mostly Turkish. And any sort of chances that he was actually biologically related to Genghis is basically zilch.
Interesting, yeah.
But that didn't stop him from claiming that he was related to Genghis.
Of course. I mean, you've got to have some kind of claim to fame, right? And I guess that was his, even if it was made up in the end.
It's alright, he was making up his other claim to fame, too.
I mean, he's a cool guy. He's got the Timurids named after him. It's always a fun time when you're playing, Medieval 2 Total War, and you get the nil announcements. First it's the Mongols, and then if you survive that, it's the Timurids, and you think, yay, here we go, round 2.
And in some ways, I think the Timurids could be more brutal conquerors than the Mongols, which is surprising.
I mean, it's quite hard to be more brutal in conquering than the Mongols, but I suppose they managed.
Yeah, they were very the Mongols are pretty famous for killing a lot of people, but the Timurids were sort of the I'm going to be probably sacking up pyramids of skulls on a monthly basis kind of people.
Perfect neighbors.
Yeah, stay a million miles away from them. But anyway, so William is mentioning a lot of food, clothing, funerals, but he also is mentioning a lot of the diversity within the Mongol Empire. Specifically, I believe he's at this point in a little-known region known as Asisha, where he actually runs into Christianized Alans. So, like, the Allens that were alive very much when Attila Hun was still running the show, way, way back in the day.
Right.
And these guys...
very old. It's always... They always kind of make me laugh when I first learned about them, because it's like, oh, the Allens tribe, the Allens over there. They're still sticking around then by the mid-13th century. They're still in Eastern Europe, still nomadic at the time, or? Yeah, and the Ossetians are actually rather proud of their ancestry. I actually figured this out as I was actually doing some research on the Sarmatians, because actually, I forgot to tell you this, the Mongols Podcast is not the only show I run. So there's more? Yeah, I'm actually slowly cobbling together a new show known as Radio Pannonia, which basically recounts all of the history of the Carpathian Basin. And yes, I do intend on uploading some episodes in Hungarian. Oh, that sounds very interesting. Oh, yes. Named after the Pannonian Plain, then? So the area to the, let me get this right, the west of the Yep, that's the old Roman colony that the Romans were putting out when they were trying to take out the Celts. Oh, I'll have to put you in touch with my friend Rob, because he knows a lot about sort of the Romanian history and that side of things there. So if a Hungarian is willing to speak to a Romanian, then, I'll put you in touch. Oh, absolutely. I'm more than willing to speak. I'm to any Romanian. Just as long as they make sure to not call the Koloshvar Napolka, as I like to say. It's okay. He's from Transylvania, so he's half Romanian, and half Hungarian Transylvanian. Oh, that's really cool, I'm sure you'll find plenty of common cause. Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. My grandmother's family is actually from some of the more eastern parts of Transylvania, like specifically Székelyek, who are basically known as the ye olde OG border guards of the Hungarian kingdom. So yeah, I imagine we'll be finding lots of good stuff. Right? Yep. Yeah, are they called the settlers? Yeah, we went through, when I was in Romania, we went through some of the settler land and saw some of the stuff there. It's really cool. Oh yeah. We ate Kurtush Kola. I've heard of it, yeah. Yeah, have you had it before? Not too often. We don't get... No, it's good. I can imagine. Yeah, but anyways, back... Yeah, let's get back on to the topic. And actually, speaking of Christians, one of the sects that I always find more surprising when I study the Mongolian Empire is that the Nestorians are actually still here, despite everything that's been happening to them for the past few hundred years. And who are the Nestorians? So the Nestorians are actually an obscure sect from way, way back from the earliest histories of Christianity. And they actually got their own little gig started by this one Roman cleric by the name of Nestorius in Alexandria. And he started actually preaching this very new anti-Trinitarian doctrine over in Alexandria. He started off in one service, and like those tweets that you really regret putting up, it just stuck around, and he was just like, you know what? Maybe I can just drink the Kool-Aid and continue believing in this. Unfortunately, the Romans did not agree with that you can still believe in this charade. So naturally, they tried everything to keep the Nestorians out of the mainstream. They tried everything to kick him and his believers out of the empire. But, well, let's just say the Nestorians have a knack for survival because, yeah, they're actually still very much alive. Like, I literally just Googled them, and they are still believing in the exact same anti-Trinitarian doctrine that they are today. No way. So, where can you find Nestorians? Are they still in Egypt? No, they left Egypt ages ago. That's what messing with the Romans kind of does with you. You kind of have to leave soon enough. And actually, they showed up in a lot of regions throughout the Middle Eastern parts of the Mongol Empire. But as far as I know, their main current center in the modern day is Iraq. But their doctrine was basically there's the human and the divine parts of Christ, and those are basically all one the same to the Nestorians. And obviously,
obviously this traditionally anti-Trinitarian doctrine is like very risque for anybody who was a Christian during the 5th and 6th centuries.
Right. And later on in the Middle Ages as well, but that would be heresy. So that would be, if you're claiming to be of the true faith, you could be put to death for that.
Oh yeah. And these guys also actually show up in Marco Polo's travels.
Okay, and when is he traveling? In what kind of date line are we talking there?
He's actually somewhere around almost 20 years after William of Rubruck. He spends most of his time actually brunching with Kublai, Monka's younger brother, who basically took over the throne after a fairly vicious civil war with their brother Arik Bokeh.
And how do the Mongols come into their interaction with the Nestorians? Because the Nestorians at the time, I'm guessing, were quite a small sect of Christianity, or were they quite a big deal in the Middle East? And how did they interact with it? And did any of the Mongols themselves decide to convert to Nestorianism?
Actually, as far as I know, there were some converts even before the Mongol Empire started. This actually includes the Naimans, who were actually a very early opponent of the forming Mongol Confederacy that Genghis Khan was throwing together. So they were that, and there was actually some pressure for the Mongol Khans to actually convert to some form of Christianity. In fact, when Marco Polo was on his journey to the Yuan dynasty, he and his father and his uncle were actually supposed to bring some, I believe, holy water from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I forget exactly off the top of my head. It was one of the holy relics, but point is, it didn't get there.
So, because they were coming, let me think. Marco Polo, does he set off from Genoa or Venice?
Venice. He said so because if you said he was setting out from Genoa, he'd probably hate your guts.
Yeah, but at that point, definitely, with all those Italian city-states. But so it makes sense then that he would go to Rome, maybe to the Holy Sepulchre or one of the other churches to bring a relic to the Mongols. But that's interesting, because then I guess, was it the Pope who was kind of driving these conversion attempts, thinking if we can control the Mongols, we can control them, contain them?
Yeah, and to some extent also use them as a weapon against the Islamic states. Because as you very well know, the Christians have been trying to establish some sort of safe and stable crusader state for the past 100 or 200 years, ever since the First Crusade. And needless to say, those attempts have not been going well. I mean, like, your second best attempt after the First Crusade was basically a tie with Richard the Lionheart. Then you had the epic fail that was the sack of Constantinople with the Fourth Crusade, and of course, the last time that Jerusalem had actually come under the control of any sort of Christian power, that was actually, I believe, Emperor Frederick of the Holy Roman Empire. He was actually going on, I believe it was like the 5th or 6th Crusade. And he managed to negotiate.
Barbarossa as well, right?
Yeah, Barbarossa is actually more famous. Although that Barbarossa is actually more famous for being the surprise secret hero that kind of died on his way to the Third Crusade.
Oh, is that a different one? Because he drowned by accident?
Yes, exactly. But he kind of, but he kind of saves the Third Crusade more than everybody else because everybody is absolutely scared crapless, thinking that he has a way bigger and more powerful army than he actually does.
Okay.
So,
how does our hero Willem? How does he fit into this picture when he's going over into the area of what would later be called the Golden Horde? Is he going on some kind of mission from the Pope? Is he trying to win them over, get them on side, or is it
that he's not so much talking?
I fancy getting to know the Mongols.
He's not so much talking with the Pope as with his king Louis IX, because Louis IX is a very committed saintly king. Yeah, he is the lone French king actually made a saint, And so Louis IX is like, I am willing to do anything to get back Jerusalem, and also make up for my defeat in Egypt. So naturally, if he can, he's going to see if Mongols, so far as it seems, the professionals in kicking Muslim empires, he wants to see if he can join up with them and get something out of it. And while William of Rubruck is actually writing here, he actually briefly does Chinggis's very tragic backstory, which I've gone through several times over in this podcast. My dad's enemies poisoned my dad at dinner, and also I had to live alone with my mother and my half brother who hated me, who I eventually helped murder with the help of my other brother, and eventually I built up this empire straight out of nowhere. That's that crazy backstory.
One of the places we get that whole story is from Willem writing it down in Europe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Although as usual, as I always say, the best material for getting this tragic anime backstory is just go back to the secret history. It's great stuff.
I was going to say, like, the original will be the secret history of the Mongols that records it, but
yeah. And at this time, while he's describing the backstory, he also briefly mentions a very important figure that not everybody talks about in Mongol history by the name of Sorkuk Tani. Sorkuk Tani, as we discussed earlier, is of course the wife of Tolui, who basically single-handedly raised their 4 kids after the death of her husband.
So a very powerful single mom right there.
Oh yeah, and this meeting obviously went over very well between him and later one of his hosts, Batu Khan, because Batu Khan was actually a bit sort of on and off in league with Sorkuk Tani for some level of control in the Mongol Empire. Batu had this streak of, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of how Ogode and Guyuk run things, so I want to run off and do my own thing. But naturally, when Ogode and Guyuk show up with their big armies and say, you might want to back down, little dude, Batu's like, yes, sir! Right there, and he's like, all right, I'll do it. But then when Sorkuk Tani starts offering him deals and maybe starts warning about stuff here and there, and he's like, maybe I could trust this crazy lady. I know she's in a very impossible situation, but you know what? I mean, like, I've got my streak of independence that I want to keep, so by all means, I will help. And eventually, Batu...
So they become unlikely allies.
Oh yeah, and Batu actually, in the late 1246 to 1250-ish Kurultai / Civil War, he actually is speaking up directly for Munka Khan's candidacy. So he's like basically saying, hey, Munka is literally the cat's pajamas. You cannot have a better Khan than this guy. And generally that is a lot of the source circle around Munka. He very much feels like Chagatai if he actually got in charge of a much bigger area of the Mongol Empire. He follows all the rules. He's a just all around good guy and doesn't actually drink all that much either. He's certainly not as copious as Kublai. That is certainly the statements of many, but that might just be Tolui propaganda coursing through the veins of every chronicler in the room.
Quite possibly.
And also, right around this time that he's mentioning Sorkuk Tani, William of Rubruck actually does meet up with another fairly famous guest in Mongolian history by the name of Berke Khan. He is actually the older brother of Batu Khan. He is not in charge of too much in the empire besides being one of Batu's subordinates.
Interesting. So Batu clearly has some kind of imperium then, or some kind of level of control over his older brother, despite the fact that normally it would be the other way around, you would expect, right, that the older brother would have more precedence. Yeah,
I don't know too much about this this part specifically, but as I know, Jochi and Chinggis were very pro leaving everything to Batu himself. So naturally, when everybody says yes to the Han, they have to say yes to the actual Han in the room.
Yeah.
And then after he briefly has his cameo with Berke, William of Rubruck also goes into some of the geography of the area, describing the grassland, the mountains, the usual stuff. And he also starts visiting with the various Muslims in the area, and they, much like the Nestorians, are actually well treated. They are still basically a minority in the Mongol Empire, but it's mostly so long as you worship your god and say yes to the Han, pay your regular tribute, we will not turn you into a pyramid of skulls.
Which is a deal that most people would be willing to accept, I think.
Yes, probably.
And just out of interest, when he's describing the Muslims who are living inside the Mongol Empire, is he traveling around the Mongol Empire? Because I'm guessing he's now left Ukraine and Western Russia.
Oh yeah, he absolutely is. He actually is showing up specifically in the capital of the Ulus Jochi, known as Sarai, and that's where most of the government, and where throughout most of the 14th century, most of the information was on the Ulus Jochi. Sadly, a lot of that burnt up when Timur decided to do a pillage.
And in which modern-day country is Sarai now?
I don't actually know at the top of my head, but I believe that is specifically east of Ukraine, so definitely a bit more actual, just plain old Russia.
Okay, yeah, Russia's enormous, so I'm guessing maybe somewhere in southern Russia then.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That description is.
Yeah, because like the Ulus Jochi actually didn't spend too much time in the north. Mostly they just said, right, so long as you pay your taxes and do as you do, we won't give a darn about you. and of course,
one way to run an empire.
It certainly was a very interesting way to run an empire, I'll tell you that. And so after so while he's visiting Sarai, he actually visits with Batu because he wants to get Batu in on the crusading business. Although that
isn't a Christian, is he, at this point?
No, I don't think so. I actually did try looking up his religion. I think he's still sticking with the oldie famous Mongol Tengriism.
Yeah, good old Tengriism.
Although I think
I absolutely love looking into Tengriism. It's one of my favorite videos to research for me, was looking at Tengriism.
I watched that video. It was pretty darn good, I'll tell you that.
Thank you.
And he actually visits with Batu in Batu's yurt. They have a decent talk. They have a decent talk. They eat together, do all the usual stuff. And Batu actually has a bit of a description in the house. Like, this is a very big, very populous yurt. This is very much worthy of a Han, if you will. And then he actually goes a bit to the Ural Mountains, and he specifically encounters these people known as the Pesketir, and otherwise known as the Bashkir. And apparently, according to him, they speak a little bit Hungarian.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a kind of Hungarian-ish tribe that's moving around there from Central Asia.
Oh yeah. I don't think they're necessarily nomads themselves, but they've probably definitely met up with old Magyars way back in the past, back when my ancestors were still in the pillaging phase.
That would be very interesting then, because it's like, I don't know how much Hungarian changed once they kind of settled down. I think they've become Christian in the 10th century, am I right in thinking, in Hungary? Yeah, they started picking up Christianity in the 10th century and then basically pulled a mass full conversion over the course of the 11th century. And then they got a brief resurgence in paganism when the Cumans hopped into town. Right, I mean, that's what happens when you get the next wave of nomads, right? Well, technically speaking, the Cumans were just... the Cumans were actually invited guests. They were trying to not pillage. Because
Yeah, because actually, so Bela had heard the bad news about the Mongols before a lot of other monarchs of Europe at the time. And he was like, oh god, these guys are scary. I need an actual plan. He starts hearing these news about the Cumans. The Cumans and the Hungarians have had a lot of good centuries of interaction. In fact, one of the Hungarian kings, I believe, Első László, or First Ladislaus, he actually has famously a legendary career for fighting the Cumans. And Bela IV kind of basically talks to some of the Cuman refugees from what is now officially the Mongol Empire. And he's like, hey, I have a problem with Mongols. Clearly you have a big problem with Mongols. And how about you guys come to my great grasslands for your horses and you help me solve my little Mongol problem? And the Cumans are like, there's got to be something more to this. And he's like, yeah, correct, because I actually have my own troubles with my nobles.
So he used them to sort out his nobles, and then later the Mongols coming in. Or
at least he tried.
Yeah, I think he ends up dead on the battlefield, right?
No. No, he actually is very lucky to be alive after the Battle of Mohi, but in the lead up to the Battle of Mohi, everything just could not possibly have gone more wrong. He loses the Cumans, his nobles completely hate his guts, because, well, you brought in a bunch of pagans, and now they're trampling over our peasants' land, so now we're angry. And we're also massacring the Cumans, and he's like, oh gosh, I can't believe the state we're in just as the Mongols are showing up. But the Hungarians did actually hold up a little better than expected, but mostly the problem at Mohi by the end of the day was basically the entire Hungarian army was just straight up annihilated.
Because in the mid-13th century, when this is happening, the Hungarians are no longer the kind of steppe nomads that they were. I'm guessing they are no longer...
Oh yeah, they are...
It's the traditional European knight style of fighting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, they're trying to hold a good chunk of the bridge with a good chunk of the bridges near Mohi with crossbowmen.
Right. So yeah, I mean, horse archers seem to be the best solution for horse archers, but even the Cumans weren't able to swing it in their favor.
Well, to be fair, the Cumans were sidelined by massacres.
Okay. So that plan didn't work then in the end.
Well, yeah, but Bela did manage to actually figure out a new plan that was basically an upgraded version of his old plan, and managed to get the Cumans on his side, basically best friends again until, well, they kind of weren't. And he managed to keep enough, and he and his successors actually managed to keep enough Cumans on their side to basically swing the next Mongol invasion in their favor.
Okay.
Because there was actually I actually mentioned the second Mongol invasion in my previous episode of the podcast talking about the Yuan dynasty, and the Mongols under the leadership of Nogai Han show up in 1286, and basically their plan was, we're going to find the Hungarian army, we're going to crush it, and we're going to take over the whole place. And this should be really easy because they don't have their Cuman friends. Spoiler alert, the Hungarians kind of still did. And then the Mongols kept on trying to find the Hungarian army, and then they were like, where is the Hungarian army? It's nowhere. Also, our supplies are gone. Also, some crazy berserk knight just ran ruckus through our camp and freed all our prisoners.
Those were the Cumans, by any chance?
Actually, that knight was a future Hungarian oligarch by name of Amadi.
Okay.
Yeah,
the Hungarians learning from their mistakes.
Oh, absolutely, it was. They were doing some of the old hit-and-run tactics that their ancestors would definitely say pride. But anyways, back to our good old friend William of Rubruck, and as he's actually going throughout the Ulus Jochi and later the later the future Yuan dynasty, the locals are actually starting to just talk to William because they've never met him before. They're very fascinated. They don't know too much about the Franciscans, so of course he tries his best in whatever crappy version of the local tongue he's been slowly picking up. And he also starts describing some more stuff, and he runs into the famous Uyghur alphabet that has been so much the basis for the written Mongol tongue, and runs into some more customs, like some of the locals actually cremate their dead, but also the Tibet, who are apparently in the area, have a very strange custom that I'm pretty sure I do not believe from this guy. They apparently eat their dead parents.
Ooh, that is quite a weird one.
Yeah, I'll put that with Marco Polo's claiming to be at the siege of Xiangyang. AKA, it's full of bullcrap, don't listen to the guy.
Maybe take it with a quite large bucket full of salt on that one.
Probably larger than the shipfuls of salt that the Romans were dumping on Carthage.
Yeah, about that level of salt. But yeah, I've never heard of a tradition of cannibalizing the human dead. The Inca in the Andes Mountains, they would often parade the dead out and bring them out. There's still a town in Asia that does it. I've seen pictures before where they bring out their dead relatives and go for a picnic with them or something, and it just looks like the most macabre, weird thing to us today. But
yeah,
eating dead parents, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, he also has a little bit of problems with the local weather there. He's obviously from France, so he is definitely not used to the Russian climate. Sounds like a secret warning in the timeline for a certain Napoleon Bonaparte.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and
but if he's meeting Uyghurs, sorry to interrupt you, but if he's meeting Uyghur peoples and their script, does that not mean that he's already in modern day China, or were they living in what's now Russia at this point?
Not exactly. The Mongols basically adopted the Uyghur alphabet lock, stock, and barrel, because the Uyghurs, actually before the Mongols conquered them, were basically one of the most civilized and settled of the nomadic tribes, and they were basically the first guys to pull an alphabet straight out their butts. So the Mongols are like, we need a language for our empire to put down actual records. Might as well rip off the Uyghurs.
Interesting, because I made a video on the Mongol alphabet. I think it's like 2 months ago now, because the government just decided to get rid of Cyrillic as the official alphabet and go back to the traditional Mongolian script in Mongolia.
Yeah.
And I looked at kind of the history of that script, and it seems to say that a lot of it was taken from the Uyghur and that it then changed some other characters around. But they go through kind of a few different scripts in the Mongol Empire. But okay, so that's very interesting then, because at the time then it was the script of the Mongol Empire, so a kind of scripta franca, if you will.
Oh yeah, and also while he's talking about the Russian cold and the people eating dead parents, he also does get to talk with hear a bit about whatever's left of the Naymans at this point. And not only were they claimed to be Christian, they were also another claimant to were the guys who Prester John was ruling over. Crazy gold-digging ruler of Ethiopia who is supposedly robbing the gold-digging ants. That guy.
Was Prester John in Ethiopia or in India? There's different accounts for him, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's
powerful place. Yeah.
I think it's I kind of think just analytically the Christians are just looking at their attempts at crusading not working, and they're just like, we're looking for any Christian power to help us. And obviously the Crusader powers were actually in contact with Ethiopia during the actual Crusades themselves, so they are very clearly looking for some help. And they certainly won't be getting any of that from the Byzantines, considering what they did to the Byzantines.
Very true. Also given the military capacity of the Byzantines at that point in history, but...
Yeah. And then after that, he goes into some of the Nestorian customs, and then he actually mentions the end of Shiramun, and Shiramun is actually the son of Guyu Khan,
remind me, Guyu Khan. No, oh no, I think I've got this wrong. Guyu Khan isn't the alcoholic son of Ogedei, is he?
He is the alcoholic son of Ogedei. He is the resident crazy dude.
Perfect. I'm up to speed. I've got it.
Yep, and Shiramoon, he was.
Resident crazy dude, right?
Yeah, and Shiramoon was very much in league with his mother Ogilgamish, who I mentioned in a previous episode, way back in my first season, and they were very much trying to succeed to Ogedei's levels and positions of power, but basically Batu and Sorkotani managed to basically outmatch the poor Ogilgamish and get both her and her kids killed.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Something wrong there.
And that was probably a lot easier for them to do, considering that the resident lawman, Chagatai, was dead. Not that Chagatai, I think, wanted to interfere, personally speaking, I think.
Sure, but not much to be done if he's dead at this point.
That is true. And then he also starts mentioning a lot more Christian denominations that besides the historians, that I didn't exactly expect. Actually, he includes the Hungarian Catholics, the Greek Orthodox. He's writing a lot of different variations of Christianity, and he's probably like, "Oh my goodness, wow, we have a really messed up history of probably stabbing each other in the back, right?" Yep.
It's interesting how many different denominations and religions there were just in that little pocket of the Mongol Empire. I'm not sure if they're still there at this point, but during the Viking Age, when the Rus start going down the rivers towards the Black Sea, you get a group there that there's even a nomadic Jewish group. I think it's the
Khazars!
The Khazars.
Yeah, actually one of the...
Are they still around at this point?
The Khazars, at this point, are long gone, but they absolutely do have their genetic survivors. Actually, a bunch of the survivors from the falling Khazar Empire actually joined up with the Magyars when the Magyars were trying to leave. So naturally,
They're no longer Jewish.
Yeah, they are probably not. They are probably not at this point.
Interesting.
Hungary has a bit of a sketchy history with their Jewish population, just in general.
I think a lot of Eastern Europe, Europe does, to be honest. But,
Oh yeah. Not everybody can be the goody two shoes that Poland tries to be, and then that abjectly fails anyway.
I guess in the end, yeah. But anyway, so William of Rubruck, he's then traveling around the kind of southern Russia, we think somewhere in that region, describing all these weird and wonderful faiths and these kind of customs and traditions. Do we know how long this journey of his took? Because that sounds like a lot of walking to do.
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. We actually don't know when he died either. But basically he does spend a lot of years just basically going around. Unfortunately, his attempts to get the Mongols on some sort of crusading scheme do fail, but hey, points for trying, A for effort right there anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty big effort on his part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And while he's in the empire, he's also encountering Christians from various other parts of the empire, notably one from Damascus. And then he actually also, right around this time in his book, he actually writes in that he makes a promise to baptize Monka. Well, Monka never really became a Catholic, I'll tell you that for sure.
It would have been interesting, I suppose. But if it would have been long-lasting, who knows?
Yeah, but personally, if I were the Great Han, I don't think I would want to listen to that crazy Pope in Rome. I'd probably talk to him like I talked to the Abbasid Caliph. Look, you're either going to obey me, or I'm going to kill you.
I think that's how they talk to most people at the time, so I'm not sure how much power and influence the Pope could have wielded over any of the Mongol Khans, right?
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And and he also is, and he has actually a lot of religious debates while he's visiting Monka. He's also has some drinking involved in these conversations. Obviously, that's probably more the Mongol than him.
I think so.
And also, right around this time, he actually one of the people that is actually hosting him, a lady Kota. She actually falls sick, and he actually goes full on doctor mode, treating her with rhubarb, holy water, and eventually, she does get a little better. So, yeah.
So, did that win him much favor with the people he was with? The fact that he was able to heal it, was he seen as some kind of miracle worker?
A little bit. Okay, we're back. Okay, so he and while he and then actually Kota, while she's sick, she actually asks her neighbors and her family to actually have 4 drawn swords put around her while William of Rubruck is at work with her. It's obviously a pretty strange custom, but at this point, she's probably desperate and hoping for some sort of superstitious nonsense to finally pull through.
Right. Maybe she was asking them to do some kind of acupuncture, but I don't know. Probably what you said is more accurate.
Yeah, and one of the things that he actually does, because he's a very inquisitive guy, and has heard from some of the other European travelers that have gone through the East, he starts asking the locals about, like, the monster sightings. Like, did you see this dog-faced dude? Or did you see these guys that hop on one leg? Or whatever crazy monsters the medievalists could conjure up. And, the locals are like, are you sure that your buddies or sources were, like, high or something? Because we ain't seen any of those.
It would have been more fun if they told him, oh, yeah, in the next village, the village looks like that, but maybe they just weren't on their trolling game.
That would not be surprising. And he also, and also while he was asking the locals about these monster sightings, and at this point he's actually in Karakorum. I forgot to mention that earlier. He's actually he notices that this Chinese priest is wearing a lot of really gorgeous red. Obviously, that's not something I would put past my Chinese ancestors. I'm like, we do ask for our women to wear it at weddings and say it's good luck and everything. Like, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like a very quintessential kind of color, the kind of deep red dress, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely something that the Chinese have loved and used for basically millennia at this point. And apparently, well, he asks, what is this stuff? And obviously he is, and I believe he is somewhat surprised to find out that this is, silk, actually.
Of course. Was that the first time he'd come across silk? Because I'm guessing it's not a...
I don't think it was probably the first time, but it was probably the first time that he really, truly probably recognized it. But he wasn't truly sure, because I think he described it as coming from a small insect.
So that'll be silk. It'll be like let me think, it's the worms that produce it.
Bingo, the Chinese came up with that. As I like to joke in my little history stuff, we Chinese people have invented everything.
Not far off, I guess. A lot of things, but sure, you get to claim silk for sure.
Oh yeah, we get to claim silk, printing, gunpowder, the compass.
Alright, stop flexing.
I am in agreement. Let's keep moving. And while he's in Karakorum, he's also meeting up with some envoys from the Song and Korean monarchies, which is definitely a slight bit of a surprise for me, especially on the Song end, because you'd think that the Song, based on their enmity with Monk at the time, would not be very welcome.
Yeah, maybe not, because it's Kublai that eventually succeeds in
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, they're still fighting in southern China.
Yeah, actually, Kublai does try his own hand at actually peacefully humiliating them very early on in his reign. He basically says to the last, one of the last Song emperors, he's like, "So I hear you still want to be in charge of your empire," and he's like, "Yeah, I do, because it's a nice empire. It's rather prosperous." And he's like, "You can. Okay, what's the catch here?" And Kublai's like, "Oh, so you want the catch? Well, the catch is you have to call me son of heaven."
Yeah.
Yeah, no Chinese emperor is ever going to say yes to that deal. I can tell you this from personal experience.
Yeah, true.
So, yep. And he also actually also talks with some of the other envoys and various traveling parties in Karakorum, more specifically parties from the Armenians and, of course, our good old friends the Nestorians. Although, actually, he doesn't call them the Armenians. I'm just calling them the Armenians just for the sake of clarity. They're actually known as, I believe, like, the Hermenians or something like that. And I was, like, really confused when I came across it. I was like, wait, who are these guys? I've never heard of you guys. And then it's like, okay, I Google you guys for a little bit, and it's like, wait, you two? Yep.
They're Armenians.
Yep.
The Armenians are very old Christian people at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They very much are. And he actually has, and there are lots of visitors, and then he celebrates, they celebrate some Christian holidays with some of the fellow Christians that he's encountered in the area, but then he actually feels a little bit unwell. And there is some rhubarb used, and this is actually diagnosed as an abscess, which I guess doesn't entirely surprise me, considering that medieval people weren't necessarily the most healthy with their dental hygiene.
That's one thing that I'm quite glad that we live in the modern age where we have toothbrush and flossing and all of this, and not in the Middle Ages.
Yep, indeed. And as far as I know, he is treated, and he actually does get better. I was a little worried for the guy, but then I checked. It's like, oh yeah, he's got a lot more to go. and he actually hoped to meet the King of Armenia. Sadly, he never got the chance.
Wait, the King of Romania?
And Armenia.
Armenia, okay, no problem. Because I was thinking, has he gone?
No. Romania is still. Romania, as far as I know, is still the Duchy of Wallachia, so that's certainly its own complications because, well, you're a duke, obviously, not a king. There's quite a difference, obviously.
Yeah, Wallachia, Moldova, and Transylvania / still part of Hungary at this point. Anyway, yeah, so he meets the King of Armenia in Karakorum, so in Mongolia.
Yep, and he also, and he does get better, and he also starts mentioning some of Monka's family, like he's like, hey, here's Arik Bokeh. Of course, he doesn't know what's going to happen to poor Arik Bokeh. Mostly, I fight a civil war with my brother and then die very mysteriously. And he mentions who Yeah, he's not there for the Civil War. He is, as far as I know, out of the picture. But that's mostly what Arik Bokeh is known for in history. He's known for the guy who tried to fight Kublai before Kublai became actual Han.
Okay, but it's still Monka who is Khan at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and Monka's running the show for the most part rather well, actually. And while he's in Karakorum, he's actually involved in a religious debate, like basically whose God is better? Whose God is better? Why does evil exist? And actually, there are some Muslims involved in this debate, and apparently, according to Rubruck's account, they apparently concede the debate to basically everybody else in the room. Although personally,
everyone else.
Although personally, although personally I kind of doubt this part of the story where like the Saracens actually like buckle under pressure because as far as I know they did not stop being Muslims, so I'm thinking they still kind of act like they won this round.
Yeah, it's also like unsurprising that the Flemish friar or monk that has gone on crusade against Muslims is now saying, "Ah, yes, the Muslims were the first to give up," and to say, actually, everyone else's argument is better than ours. It's a little bit like, of course, he would say that.
Yep. And then he finally has his final talk with Monka Han right around Pentecost, the very famous holiday that basically gets shoved into every medieval romance ever. and Monka's like, well, actually, I don't know if we're going to necessarily help you on the crusade, but William, you do seem like a great guy, and I wish you well. And then he eventually sends William on his way with some gifts back to France. He's like, hey, Louis, if you ever want to talk, I'm more than willing, although sadly that chance never comes by for either of those two. Although I think that would have been a very fascinating conversation, whether by letter or in person.
I think so. Yeah, or a kind of joint Mongol crusade. The Crusaders coming on the one side and then the Mongols coming from the other. That would be an interesting alternate history to look at.
Yeah, and there was certainly some on and off backing for the Mongols from the Crusader states at the time when Hulagu was actually just marching through and wrecking everything. They basically took a look at basically everybody who fought with the Mongols, and they're like, yeah, we don't stand a chance. I mean, we already have a tough time on our own with Saladin's successors, so yeah, we might as well try to suck up to the Mongols while we're ahead. And they were like, but they're also like, but also if you take out the Muslims, that'd be really great.
Well, yeah, it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Oh,
if the Mongols were attacking the Muslim powers, then that meant they could be allies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Monka and as our good friend William, as he's packing his bags, he actually elaborates more on some of the religious customs at the time, and he also elaborates on some very great news from Monka. Monka actually gets a son. Sadly, that son's going to be about almost as obscure as our somewhat minor friend Arik Bokeh.
Okay.
So
I was a little excited there, but never mind.
Yeah, so don't get your hopes up too much, my good friend. So
I won't.
But also as William is packing up his bags from Karakoram and preparing to eventually go back home, he actually gets a message from the Han, and the Han is like, I want to Ooh, our connection's a little... Hilbert? Anyways, so we were actually discussing one of the final parts of William of Rubruck's little book. He actually gets a little letter from Monka Han himself, and Monka is actually like, "Hey, can you actually be the middleman between me and Louis?" And William is obviously thrilled for the gig. And I mean, like, he's already heading back home. Might as well pull this one in out of just straight convenience.
Well, exactly.
And basically, the short version of this message is basically, "Hey, I'm Monka. Hi, Louis. Very nice to meet you. I do wish you well, and obviously, I'm sorry I can't join your next crusade, but I do wish you good luck on your next one." Sadly, that dream did not come true for our friend Louis.
As we've seen in history.
Oh yeah. But also, in case I ever start walking into Europe again, just remember I am the big guy. So I would prefer if you not resist me.
So it was it was an invitation in a way, and a greeting of friendship, but also a just remember who I am. So if I ever decide to come west, you're the one bowing to me. Let's get that straight.
Yep. And then briefly, William of Rubruck actually stays with Sartok, but Munka does kind of want to talk to Munka does want to talk to our good friend William a little bit more. William is sadly I've got to bounce, and Sartok gives tunics to William and his fellow friends. And by this point, they're going through mostly Golden Horde territory. So once again, he's our good friend William is chatting up with the Allens, catching up with them, and then Sartok also guards some passes to actually try to keep some of the Allens down, because the Allens, being still slightly nomadic, are never going to be fully comfortable with everything in the room. And then he our good friend William goes into a bit of prophecy, and basically these prophecies include, like, the archers are prophesized to wreck stuff, which is obviously good news for the Mongols, and also the Franks.
Yeah, is that much of a prophecy, or just a kind of stating the obvious,
To some extent, yes, but also no. He also prophesizes that the Franks are going to get.
Yes, but actually no.
Yeah, and he also prophesizes that the Franks are going to get a lot farther in the Middle East. Sadly, that prophecy does not get fulfilled.
Yeah, not even under Napoleon, I guess, but
yeah.
You can dream.
Well, yeah, Louis actually tries to fulfill that prophecy on his own later on with the 8th Crusade, I believe around the 1270s. He invades Egypt again, but he sadly catches a very bad case of malaria and dies or something like that. So naturally, he's out of the picture. And by that point, the Mongols are also actually trying to not really in on the wanting to bash the Muslims gig. Not to say that they aren't at war with them. They're at war with them all the time, but they're realizing that maybe they're a bit out of their league in some cases. In fact, as they get closer to Egypt, they actually run smack dab into the Mamluks. And the Mamluks...
A bit of a beating, don't they?
Oh yes, although that was a rather close one, and really had one major decisive factor that allowed the Mamluks to even come on top in the first place.
Okay.
Now, specifically that the Mongol Empire wasn't as big as it was... Mongol army in the area wasn't as big as it was supposed to be. In fact, Munka actually died just as Hulegu was approaching Egypt. Specifically, this was right around the year 1260. And so Hulegu, being the good little brother that he is, he actually has to go home and talk to the other brothers on who's going to be the next Han. And also probably figure out the...
Right, so again, it was saved by the fact that a Khan died and they had to retreat out, right? It's a similar situation to Western Europe, I think, right?
Somewhat similar. I'll definitely tell you that. But there is a little bit more recent scholarship that we actually don't know why the Mongols left Western Europe alone.
Yeah, I did an archaeology paper this year, and there was some discussion about whether it was a climatic shift that might have driven the Mongols from Europe as well. But I think it was something like there were really cold winters and then a really warm spring, so there was flooding on the Pannonian Plain. It was made difficult to assault the walls because there was marsh that had expanded over and they couldn't get enough fodder for their horses.
Oh yeah.
Quite an interesting article. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of folktales about some of the Mongol raids that my grandparents used to tell me when I was a little kid, and often the common tactic for the local people was just run straight to the swamp and don't look back.
Yeah, I mean, if it works, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and apparently it did. and of course, and unfortunately, our Hulegu left behind his buddy Kipukwa and with about 10,000 guys, and basically it's like, we're probably not going to be able to conquer Egypt with your little army, but keep their heads down if you can. Unfortunately, they got drawn into the wrong sort of battle with the Mamluks over at Ain Jalut. It was still a very close run thing, and absolutely Kipukwa's army had its survivors. But it was very clear to many that, yeah, Egypt is just not going to work out for us. So, but that doesn't stop the Mongols from actually trying to conquer the whole dang thing again. There's still many wars between the Mongols and the Mamluks, but none of these involve any sort of territory gained or lost. So,
right.
Yeah. And also concerning this prophecy, the Franks are also supposed to convert the Middle East to Christianity and get past the Caucasus, and I'm just like, yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon, peoples. Don't get your hopes up. And it looks like, and basically with that, Rubruck does finish off his book, and as far as I know, he's mostly out of the Mongol Empire. He's very happy about his visit. He's very happy to have written about it. Sad that the Mongols did not sign up for the crusade.
I can imagine, after all that effort, you would have hoped that he would have got them to come along and to actually support them in their crusade for the Middle East. But yeah, at least we have the story, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The crusade at the end, it's about the Mongols you met along the way.
It absolutely is, my good friend. It absolutely is. And with that in mind, I do have to actually probably start getting ready for work, but also, I believe the book is basically over at this point. But it was really nice actually chatting with you, Hilbert. So naturally, we're going to have to find another excuse to do this again.
I certainly think we should. I would really like that. And I didn't know about this before that you actually emailed me about it, and you said there was this crazy Flemish guy that went and walked through most of the Mongol Empire. So it's crazy that we have this surviving to us today, that he did that and then that he wrote the book. Do you know what the book was called? Did he have a name for it?
I think I need to actually look it up again. It's been a while since I finished up research on this topic. I've been sitting on the script for probably a good month now.
Okay, yeah, no problem. But yeah, that would be really interesting, because if there is maybe a translation or an edition that people could read if they want to read his adventures, I'm not sure if there will be. It might be something online. But
I believe I do have an online version. That's how I found it and later contacted you. I'll actually check my bookmarks here real quick, because I do still have a little bit of time on my hands.
Yeah, no problem. I don't want to make you late for work, but if you can do that. If not, then if you find it later, you can always put it in the description.
That's currently my plan on that.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, found it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. I've actually found all my. I actually found my main source. And it's. And this is actually the translation done by W.W. Rockhill, and this is known as The Journey of William of Rubruck to the Eastern Parts of the World, as narrated by himself, with two accounts of the earlier journey of John de Plano de Carpino. I believe I'm going to probably have to look into John de Plano de Carpino or later, probably. But yeah, this is...
The word just creates itself, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You've got him writing about the earlier travels, so you can maybe see what was happening in the Mongol Empire earlier on too, and maybe compare the two.
Absolutely. I'm definitely going to have to do that when I get there. Anyways, I'll be definitely putting that in the description, and obviously I'm going to be leaving lots of links to support me and to support me and in the description of my podcast, and obviously I'm going to give a link to your YouTube channel because, well, you're just a great guy.
Oh, thank you very much. That's really, really kind of you. And thanks for having me on and for sharing all of your boundless wisdom on the Mongols and their empire in that time. That's the point. Let's get something set up and we can maybe look into another aspect of the Mongol Empire or the Mongols more generally.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on.
And also, if you are looking for more material, especially on the military side of things, go to my good friend Jack Meister. he has his own YouTube channel. He is absolutely nuts and good with it. He actually spends a lot of time running the Kings and Generals episodes about the Mongols, if anybody's really wondering where they get their info from.
Okay. Well, if you wouldn't mind putting me in touch with him, then, I can get in touch with him, and maybe we can do a kind of three-way podcast at some point that we all three of us talk, and I can hopefully catch up my very limited knowledge of the Mongols by being around you guys.
Oh yeah, I can imagine, especially with Jack Meister. I mean, like, I'm not too shabby myself, but I've got nothing on Jack Meister.
Yeah? Oh, well, both fountains of knowledge then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, as far as I know, I'm the guy who will absolutely clear everybody up on anything related to Manduhai.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that in another episode then.
Oh yeah, she is her own fascinating character, and I do not have the time to talk about her right now. But anyways, see you around, dude.
Perfect. See you later. Thank you very much.
Alright, bye.
See ya.
If you like this segment of the Mongols Podcast, be sure to follow me on Twitter at YoungBards101, like our Facebook page at History with Samwise J. Morgenstern, and follow us on Tumblr at GoSJM42 on GoSJM42 Mongol History. You can also support us on Anchor or Patreon. As always, our sources are in the description, and we also have rewards for our patrons ranging from shoutouts to polls. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And as always, Blue Heaven wills everything.